the victim of attack in turn. So there are three realities. The status quo is very good for Turkey. The peace dividend is incredibly good for Turkey. The downside risk is that there is a regional rift that turns into a military event. That will have widespread implications. Turkey is a stable internal economy. It's a member of the G20. It has an established democracy. It is one of the most attractive investment destinations there is, regardless of any regional risk.
It was earlier noted in the program that Turkey's hesitancy to sign the defense shield was in part due to the importance of Iranian gas supplies, which exceeds 20%. Historically, Iran has decreased Turkey's gas supplies unexpectedly and renegotiated gas supplies. Mr. Chakir, what economic impacts would unpredictable Iranian gas supplies and prices bear on the Turkish economy?
Well, it's still a negligible amount if you take a look at the bigger picture here. The amount of gas that we are purchasing from Iran is nothing more than $2–3 billion worth of in total. So if we think the worst case scenario is happening and Iran decides not to supply the gas to Turkey, I think we can bypass that, and the cost wouldn't be too high to hurt us. I mean, let's say we got a 20% hit on the new negotiation, then it's not even more than $400 million. Turkey is a country where we got the public debt of $350 billion, so like it's just a couple of bips change in the interest rates if you take a look at the cost structure. So I think that's something negligible. The 1,000-year relationship with Iran, I think that's more important. You know, the Iranian border set in 1639 and never been violated ever since. So there's a strong relation there. But the other side, the price tag is not that big, I guess.
Dr. Savory, can you comment on that in respect to the Turkish-Russian relationship and how Russia can use its ability to provide and hold back vast energy supplies to Turkey for diplomatic leverage?
What's interesting is that you mentioned the potential for Iran to interrupt or to inflate gas supplies through Turkey, and the answer was that it's not a particularly important element. Compare Russia with the Ukraine, where that muscle has been flexed over the last 3 or 4 years. There's a huge potential for Turkey to engage economically and commercially with Russia, but there's enormous potential for Turkey to engage economically with the European Union, with its neighbours to the south. Turkey does sit very, very, very favourably in a regional context. It can boast neighbours who are growing very strongly, and if only a solution could be found where the regional element of risk could be removed by some agreement with Iran, the peace dividend would be enormous, and I can think of few economies in the region that would benefit more than Turkey.
Dr. Savory, how do you feel about Turkish defense spending on its economy? The missile defense system will not be cheap, and Greece's heavy defense spending put it in a bad place. Is there a common economic threat to Turkey?
Not really. I wouldn't exaggerate the impact of Greek defense spending on the Greek economy. The Greek economy is suffering because of a great many other problems that it's facing. I'm not a great believer that defense has a great many economic multipliers. For choice, less defense spending is an improvement because it frees up capital into much more valuable and productive sectors. Interesting enough, if you look at events in Western Europe, defense spending is being cut because of fiscal austerity. Yes, Turkey will raise its defense spending in absolute terms and relative terms. No, it won't slow growth. I don't see it as an impediment. I don't see it as a positive, but I don't see it as a negative. It's an event you pursue when you're growing. The Chinese are pursuing the same course. Their defense spending is increasing. An element of it is bravado. Some degree of it is defense, but really, in terms of economics, it bears very little impact. And to repeat, the problems in Greece are unique to Greece beyond defence spending and aren't common to Turkey.
Okay, Mr. Chalkan, could you comment on Turkey's defense spending? Do you see that is it increasing in the future? Is it decreasing because of its improved relationships with its neighbors?
Well, it's a tricky question. If you take a look at the defense spending in, let's say, year 2000, it was like 4% of the GDP. Now it's down to 2%, but the GDP almost doubled in last 10 years. So it tells me one thing: we are going to spend the almost same amount of money to defense, but as long as we got a healthy growing economy here, as long as GDP can afford to spend that, I think there's no problem, because, you know, this is the reality of the region, and you have this army and everything. I think we must more focus on the economy and the production side of the country, the possibilities, rather than the defense spending, because, you know, historically Turkey has always have this second largest army in the NATO, and I don't think that it's going to get any smaller than this in the near future. There's this plans to have a smaller army, but I think the spending will be there.
Okay, one last question for Mr. Grant. As a currency trader and economist in New York, what kind of outside shocks or internal shocks are the traders looking for in the currency markets in Turkey?
You know, it's interesting looking back on 2010. The emerging markets, for the most part, continued to trade well. We saw a lot of equity strength. We saw very strong markets in general, strong inflows. What really changed in 2010 was the Western countries. We saw cracks in their fiscal funding abilities, and what started with Greece has now spread to other parts of Europe. So I think what's changing, certainly in the European space, is a few years ago it was Turkey very keen to become a part of Europe and working with the EU leaders on ascension. In the last sort of 6 months, we've seen Europe looking to pull Turkey in more so than Turkey pushing to get in. So that's obviously a long-term issue and unlikely to change very quickly. But the key thing is, it feels like the G7, we've seen a lot of issues around funding, and it's impacting growth, and it's going to impact things like defense spending as well. But I think when we look at places like Turkey, it looks more interesting. You're seeing it's a very young country compared to most of the Western countries. It's got very dynamic growth, and I think that, you know, from a currency perspective, you're still seeing very good yields. Rates were cut from 7% to 6.5%. So still a very nice yield compared to what you're getting in, say, the U.S. or in the EU, or Europe, I should say. But I think that in general, going forward, you know, when you're running a wide current account deficit, it creates a greater likelihood of shocks when things do get a little bit concerning, or when we do move into crisis modes, or we see issues such as we saw with the credit-led recession over 2007, 2008. So, but overall, I think that Turkey's in a very healthy situation. I think the currency will probably remain stable, if not weaken a little bit. But that's perhaps partially what the central bank is looking for. And I think that deep down, for the medium term, that's a good thing. So I think it remains a very sound investment. We'll continue to see very strong inflows. And from the currency perspective, it's going to remain a good investment.
This discussion reinforces what we already know, that geopolitics and economic development walk hand in hand. NATO presents benefits as well as challenges that Turkey must balance while maintaining its security and economic growth. Thank you for being with us, and see you next week on Corridor 39.